Hi, everyone. Just wait a second while the participants join us. Okay, it looks like it's slowing down a bit. So welcome everyone to our Disaster Legal Services Program webinar, how we're responding to COVID-19 and how you can help. I'm really glad you are all able to join us today, and we hope that this will give you an insight into the DLS program in general and how things are rolling right now in terms of COVID-19 and what you can do to get involved. So we're hoping to clear up any confusion that there might be out there, or to teach some of you who have nothing or no idea about DLS what it's all about. We have a great panel of speakers today. I am Linda Anderson Stanley. I am the director of the American Bar Association Young Lawyers Division Disaster Legal Services Program. And in my day job, I am also the senior manager of disaster programming at Equal Justice Works. I am joined by Amanda Brown, who is the Vice Director of the ABA YLD Young Lawyers Disaster Legal Services Program, and also the founder and executive director of Lanyap Law Lab. Jim Sandman, who is the chair of the ABA COVID-19 Task Force, and Andrew Van Singel, who is the chair of the ABA Standing Committee on Disaster Response and Preparedness, and he is also advisor to the YLD Disaster Legal Services Program. So I'm going to start with an overview of how the DLS program works, and then we're going to jump into how it's responding in terms of COVID and any federal implications. We'll hear from Amanda about our national hotline and our national pro bono portal. Then we'll hear a bit from Jim on the task force and pro bono, and then we will hear from our standing committee chair. And so I will just dive right into the legal services program functionality. So the ABA's role in disaster. The DLS program is a public service project operated through a memorandum of understanding between the ABA Young Lawyers Division and FEMA, and this began nearly 50 years ago. The program coordinates free legal help for disaster survivors from volunteer attorneys. The DLS program is one of the numerous federal programs that are available after a disaster, and it's explicitly written into the Stafford Act. So if we look a little bit at the structure of FEMA assistance, it kind of helps you to visualize where our program lies. When there's a disaster that exceeds the state's capacity to respond, the governor will request assistance from the federal government, which comes in three main categories: hazard mitigation, public assistance, and individual assistance. DLS falls under the many programs available within the individual assistance program, and it's commonly deployed when there is a major disaster declaration that specifically authorizes individual assistance. So what does this look like in practice? Before a disaster strikes, ideally there should be an up-to-date disaster plan in place that lays out who's responsible for the hotline, pro bono recruitment, and what key partners should be included in the coordination calls for that state. When we have an active disaster, for the larger disasters, we're typically watching, and we're going to reach out to you to initiate planning and verifying where that we have the most current disaster plan in place. Many of you probably received this communication from us a few months ago as we were anticipating implementing DLS for COVID-19. Then we'll receive a major disaster declaration. Once we get that, we let our partners know that there has been a major disaster declaration in your area and to begin thinking about and preparing for implementation. Typically, that is followed by a letter of intent from FEMA to activate DLS. At this point, we should have already had a well-established disaster plan in place and have already pre-planned and coordinated and are ready to turn on the hotline. Ideally, within 48 hours, we'll have a toll-free hotline for disaster relief up and running for survivors. How this actually looks varies state by state and from disaster to disaster. So for example, here in Florida, our statewide disaster legal services hotline is hosted by the Florida Bar, while in Tennessee, it's hosted by the Tennessee Alliance for Legal Services. So it just really depends on local capacities. Once the hotline is up and running, we work with the local bar association to recruit volunteer attorneys to assist with the call volume. Legal aid really bears the brunt of these types of cases when a disaster hits. So the idea is for us to work together to try to take some of the load off of legal aid. They're really the experts in landlord-tenant, public benefits, public housing, all those types of cases. So we really want to get volunteers out there to work on those insurance claims and estate planning, and ideally even FEMA appeals when applicable. Each disaster is different and the legal needs, of course, may vary, but it's important for all of us to work together. And as such, the program also serves as a coordinator for local and national disaster communities by convening weekly coordination calls with the local bar associations, the legal aid providers, and this is when we're going to wrap in our friends at Red Cross, at FEMA, other emergency management, and other key players. And that's another reason why it's really important that we have our disaster plans up to date, so we have the most up-to-date contacts on who to include in these coordination calls. The federal DLS implementation also brings it with it the possibility for up to $5,000 in reimbursement from the federal government for hotline startup and operational costs to the operator of the hotline. Eligibility for the Disaster Legal Services Program. It's available to anyone who has insufficient resources to secure adequate legal services. The insufficiency could have existed prior to the disaster or be a result of the disaster. When questions of eligibility arise, we typically err on the side of inclusion rather than exclusion. Since DLS is provided for free to eligible individuals, fee-generating cases are prohibited by this program. Other than that one restriction, eligibility is very relaxed compared to our LSC friends, and this is why that pro bono attorney aspect of the DLS program is so important, so that we can assure that all disaster survivors are receiving legal coverage. For a more in-depth view of the eligibility requirements, I threw in the reg for you for the Stafford Act. Currently, the DLS program is responding to a number of natural disasters, including in Mississippi, Oregon, Puerto Rico, East Tennessee and Middle Tennessee, South Carolina, and we are also standing by for that letter of intent for potentially implementing in Kentucky and North Carolina. So the million-dollar question you're all waiting for, I'm sure, is has DLS been authorized to respond to COVID-19? And the short answer is no. But the longer answer is what's happening with COVID is we're seeing a lot of governors include a broad ask for individual assistance in their major disaster declarations. Many of them are even specifically requesting disaster legal services in these requests. But what we're seeing here for some reason is that once the president signs off and makes the declaration, we're not getting the DLS piece authorized. In fact, we're not seeing any piece of individual authorized outside of crisis counseling. We're struggling to figure out why that is or where the breakdown is coming from as these requests go from the governor to the president. We have heard the potential that since Legal Services Corporation was given $50 million to address legal needs in the CARES Act, standing up DLS would be a duplication of these services. Although DLS works very close with the legal services grantees, the program does really help a different segment of the population that might not otherwise receive legal assistance. The DLS program's eligibility test, like we talked about, is significantly relaxed when it is compared to traditional legal aid programs, which means many disaster survivors that are otherwise not eligible for assistance from an LSC grantee can get help through the DLS program. So the two really work in tangent to complement each other rather than a duplication of services. Although some of our partners are very well equipped to gear up their statewide disaster hotlines without this federal DLS implementation triggering that federal funding, and they have done so for COVID, there are many more that haven't been hit with a disaster in the past few years and don't really have the capacity or the infrastructure to do so without the additional funding. So we, as the Disaster Legal Services team, are still in discussion about this and continue to advocate for the federal approval of the program. We have not gotten a yes or a no yet, but we're still working on it. So in the meantime, we've come up with a few ideas and a few national programs that you can tap into. And to discuss those a little more in depth is Amanda Brown, our Disaster Legal Services Program Vice Director. So I am now going to turn it over to Amanda to discuss that a little bit more.
Hey everyone. Okay, so we are very excited to share about the work that we've been doing as it relates to our national DLS hotline and the national DLS Pro Bono portal. I think there has been some confusion around both of these programs, and to give you a little bit additional context that Linda alluded to earlier, I'll even back it up further. Both of these two programs have been something that our program has aspired to for several years now. We just hadn't had either the capacity or funding or right partners in place to be able to accomplish these things. Because most of the time, if you can tell from our existing disasters, these are kind of on an ad hoc basis. We really are mostly responding when a natural disaster strikes, and the circumstances are limited to a particular geographic area versus the entire United States that we're dealing with now. So in March, whenever we started reaching out to you guys, it was really an effort for us to start preparing to implement 50 states and multiple US territory programs, despite not really having the infrastructure in place to do that. I think on one hand, COVID was a blessing in disguise for us, and as it allowed us to start incorporating these programs into the YLD program. But I hope that kind of gives you a little understanding and okay, I hope you guys kind of get a sense for the reasons that we are starting to set this up. If you can imagine how difficult it is to stand up a hotline and get a press release out and start coordination calls in one state after one single disaster, imagine trying to implement that across 50 states and multiple territories. So we were lucky enough to start the national hotline, which in partnership with Ring Central, they've provided us free national services for our call center. So I just wanted to give you a little insight about what the difference is now in COVID and why we kind of have this exception since we're not actually authorized for DLS, and then give you a general background about how it's going to work in the future as hurricane season starts ramping up and all of that. Tracy, I'm not able to advance the slide.
Is that the right side?
I need to advance it, it's just not working. If you can advance it, that's fine.
Which number slide would you like to be on?
Just click on the next one. Okay, I'll just keep rolling. If we can get the slides to work, that would be great. If not, that's okay too. I'm sure they'll be circulated after the webinar, and they'll be a good reference point for all the things that we're going to talk about. But generally, in a normal implementation, what happens is once the disaster is approved, we stand up those hotlines with our local partners, and within 48 hours, those are running at a state level. With the national hotline, all that we're going to be doing is plugging in the existing number that individual state has running for DLS and just connecting it to the national number, so that when someone calls that 877 number and they indicate that they're located in Tennessee, they're going to be directed to the Tennessee disaster line. So in that case, we're automatically going to connect those numbers. And the real reason for that is because that national number is what's going to be distributed on FEMA materials and denial letters in the future. This was one, I think, if you can imagine, it's impossible to put a hotline number for each individual state on FEMA denial letters. So this will really allow us to better market the hotline and increase awareness generally for DLS hotlines to the public, but also making sure that FEMA materials have can list a location where people can actually call and receive assistance if they receive a denial letter. So under normal circumstances, that's how it will work. We'll just automatically make that connection. But for the purposes of COVID-19, any state that does have an existing hotline running is more than welcome. And we, in fact, encourage you guys to let us know so that we can connect you. If you see the number here now on the screen, this will be the number that's distributed on all FEMA materials going forward. So really the gist of that is if you have a hotline that's up and running, that's a statewide number that serves every kind of county in your state, please let us know, and we would love to connect your number to our national hotline. If we now can move on to talking about the DLS Pro Bono Portal. I think this is another area that we're really excited about, and where admittedly there has been some level of confusion about what it's for and all of that. So I want to first start with a little demonstration of it to give you some snapshots of what the site actually looks like. And then I'll move into talking about how you can get connected, and much like we talked about for the hotline, what it means normally for an ordinary disaster declaration, and then what it means now for COVID-19. So here on the first page, this is really the landing page of our disaster relief portal. You can see that we have multiple different tiles listing not just COVID-19 opportunities for now, but also ongoing disasters that we have active hotlines for, including the Puerto Rican earthquakes, as well as Tennessee tornadoes. And then we will be adding additional hotlines as they're stood up through the FEMA partnerships. And this really is intended to be a long-standing piece of our program going forward. So anytime that there is a disaster in your state and you're looking for opportunities to get involved or volunteer, this is where we're ultimately going to send you to investigate what opportunities are available, and then connect with us so that we can connect you, or even directly with the organizations that are needing that support. On the next slide, you'll see this is kind of below the fold, as they call it. If you scroll down on the first page, this is really where you're getting all of your data points that allow you to filter the opportunities that are available. And that's one of the really great things about this portal versus the way that we were traditionally doing volunteer recruitment and engagement, is that we're giving volunteers the opportunity to find things that they actually have the comfort level and the skills and the desire to work on, and connect them with those opportunities. Because what happens a lot of times is there's a really strong response to pro bono needs after a disaster, but sometimes volunteers maybe don't feel as comfortable with the practice area that we're connecting the organization to. So through this, we're really hoping to make that more of a granular way to express interest in these opportunities. And then you can also see there's different levels of service, from fixed time commitment and litigation to just training opportunities and transactional, maybe clinics or things like that. And I want to be sure to point out at the bottom that this, and to clarify, that this portal is not for the public in any way. It really is about connecting pro bono volunteer lawyers with volunteer opportunities through organizations that already have they have malpractice insurance, they already have longstanding pro bono programs. This is not really about connecting people directly to pro bono or to clients themselves. So we, of course, include the number to our national hotline, which will route people directly to the state hotline that they need. On the back up to the top here, I just wanted to show that if you see across the navigation bar at the top, all attorneys can browse by the category that they want to help, or the fixed time commitment or anything like that. And then if you see towards the right, you can also filter by state. Next, let's pretend that we're going to dive into the COVID-19 relief opportunities, so you can get a sense for what those look like from the user's perspective. And if you do that, on the next slide, you'll see that we have over 100 volunteer opportunities available across the country through our program, where not only are we sourcing volunteer opportunities just from our program's perspective and then referring those out to organizations that in the same capacity that we normally would through our DLS program, but we're also inviting other legal service organizations to join and place and manage their own volunteer opportunities, so that we're kind of removing the middleman, and they can directly communicate with and screen the volunteers and make those referrals out. So I think the next slide, I just wanted to show, now we're kind of filtering by state, because that's really, of course, there are limitations to where you can practice unless there is a Katrina rule in place. So if we click on the next slide for an opportunity in Florida, this is what the actual opportunity looks like. You have a great descriptive title and then a description of what the actual opportunity is, along with those really specific tags for who this opportunity will help and what kind of services are going to be provided. To the right of your screen, you see that this one in particular is great for remote volunteers and lawyers, and it is a fixed time commitment. And then it also even talks about what level of training and support is available for attorneys, so that whenever they volunteer, they know that they're going to be supported in their efforts. And I think finally, if we click on express interest, this box drops down where a volunteer, they do not need to have an account or anything. They can just press express interest and fill out their details, and then that information is sent to the service provider or our program if that provider is not connected. On the DLS Pro Bono Portal, for normal implementations, this is similar to as we talked about on the hotline. Once a disaster is approved and the hotline goes up, we're automatically going to be adding those opportunities as DLS opportunities to the portal. And realistically, this is not any different from what we were already doing. We're using this as an opportunity to help us manage the workflow and the volume of requests that we sometimes get after natural disasters. In some cases, we've circulated a Google form and gotten, 2,000 volunteers want to sign up and help, and it's really unmanageable to try and refer those out to all organizations, and then, but more importantly, make the connection through the kinds of services that the volunteer wants to provide and that the organization actually needs. All that's to say, you don't have to do anything different. We're just going to be placing opportunities, and this is how we're going to circulate those on social media and things like that to just try and recruit volunteers. But you do have the option, as I mentioned, to come in and manage your own. And that will include creating the opportunities and doing all of the descriptions, but also making sure that whenever someone expresses interest, you're instantly notified and you can start making those connections as soon as you would like. For COVID-19, because we're not in a normal implementation, we are just making it an exception that any organization across the country that wants to have their opportunities included in this pro bono portal, please, we welcome you to do that. We have just a little intake sheet that takes about 5 or less minutes to fill out to talk about what your opportunity is. And then we will happily put that up on the portal for you. So you can feel free to share that if you don't have something like that where you're trying to recruit volunteers. But then of course, we also have the option for you to come in and create your own, manage them, and then have them listed under the ABA portal through a tag that's specific to COVID-19. I have to thank Paladin. This is the software that we built the portal on. They came in kind of at the 11th hour as we were trying to figure out how we were going to manage a national implementation and deal with the onslaught of legal issues that we know our country is facing and support our on-the-ground partners that we often work with. So we're really grateful to them. They provided the service to us for free. And this is the link to the actual portal if you wanted to check it out and give it a test drive for yourself. And then, of course, the big point here is that on the next slide, if you want to get your hotline connected, we encourage you to do so. And if you want to have volunteer opportunities, please just reach out. We're here. I have my email on the slide here. You can email me directly and I will either get your hotline number added or your opportunities put onto the portal.
Good afternoon. I'm Jim Sandman. I am chairing the American Bar Association's Task Force on Legal Needs Arising Out of the 2020 Pandemic. The American Bar Association's Board of Governors created this task force in mid-March and gave us 3 charges. First, to identify legal needs arising out of the pandemic. Second, to make recommendations for meeting those needs. And third, to mobilize pro bono resources. I'd like to very briefly describe the work of the task force and then put in a plug, a big plug, for the pro bono portal that Amanda has just described. We're approaching our work as a clearinghouse. We're collecting information about what people in law are doing across the United States relating to the pandemic and trying to make it easily accessible to people and pushing it out. We've created a website that you can find at americanbar.org/coronavirus task force. You will find there a comprehensive set of resources on a whole range of legal issues arising out of the pandemic. What we're seeing is a variety of legal issues arising right now and some coming down the road that are overburdening the traditional legal aid network and creating a great need for pro bono assistance. The immediate legal needs have tended to be in the area of accessing benefits, unemployment insurance benefits, CARES Act benefits that people have had trouble accessing and often need legal assistance to get, particularly if initially they're unsuccessful and face a denial. Longer term, we anticipate other categories of needs that have not arisen yet, but are sure to come down the road. For example, because of the economic consequences of the pandemic, so many people out of work, it is certain that there will be a significant increase in the number of evictions and foreclosures across the United States coming in the months ahead. We have not seen those yet because in most places across the country, courts or legislatures have imposed temporary deferrals of evictions and foreclosures, and they're not going ahead. But those have only a temporary limit, and there will come a point where those deferrals are lifted and where we anticipate seeing a large number of evictions and foreclosures. We also anticipate seeing a significant spike in debt collection cases across the country. Those too have been delayed temporarily in a number of places across the United States, but those delays are only temporary. So we have already seen legal aid organizations overwhelmed with increased demand, and we know that's only going to get greater as time goes on. So mobilizing pro bono resources to supplement the limited resources of legal aid is a critical component of trying to provide legal help to people who need it. And that's where this portal comes in. It's really quite remarkable in my view. I've never seen anything like it on a national scale, matching pro bono volunteers with pro bono opportunities. As Amanda mentioned, this is not a direct-to-consumer tool. It is not something that members of the public who need help can go to get matched up with a lawyer. It serves two audiences. First, legal services organizations, traditional legal aid organizations, who can post opportunities to do pro bono work. Second, it serves lawyers who are looking for volunteer opportunities related to the pandemic. So it's a matchmaking service between the legal aid organization that needs volunteer help and the lawyers who want to volunteer. It is intended to supplement and not supplant state and local pro bono operations that may already be in place. But it can be particularly useful in two ways. First, not every community across the United States has this kind of infrastructure available, a website up and running, a portal where people can look for opportunities, screen them based on their competence, their expertise, their areas of interest. They can screen them based on how much time they have available, a short-term assignment or something longer term. And these are all obviously screenable geographically. It also can help to deal with a perennial problem in the world of pro bono. That is a mismatch between the geographic location of legal needs and the location of lawyers who might be eager to help out to address those needs. People in rural areas often have difficulty finding pro bono assistance. I'll give the example of Georgia. In Georgia, 70% of the lawyers in the state are located in the 5-county Atlanta metropolitan area. 70% of the poverty population in Georgia is located outside of the 5-county Atlanta metropolitan area. This tool permits someone in Albany, Georgia, a smaller town that has been dramatically affected by the pandemic. You may have read about a funeral there that turned out to be a hotspot. And lawyers in Atlanta who can help their fellow Georgians in a location that might be remote from them. So I really am very impressed by and appreciative of the creativity of this tool. I think it is a national model. I think that it will have replication opportunities in a variety of different ways across the country going forward. The tool is succeeding so far in attracting listings of pro bono opportunities from legal aid organizations across the United States. We have no shortage of opportunities listed there. Where we need help is steering lawyers who would like to volunteer to do pro bono work to it. It's harder to reach them, the volunteer lawyers, than it is to reach the legal aid organizations for whom there are existing listservs and with whom the Disaster Legal Services Program has long established relationships. They can contact them easily. Much harder to do, to contact the hundreds of thousands of volunteer lawyers across the United States were trying to educate about the availability of this resource. So I solicit your help and encourage you to reach out in your communities to spread the word about the availability of this resource. And I want to thank Linda and Amanda and the Disaster Legal Services Program, the Young Lawyers Division, for really setting an example of creativity and innovation at a time when it's very badly needed.
All right, thanks, Jim. And also just great shout out to Amanda and Linda for all the work that they've done on this program, taking it to the next level. And we're hoping that this will really have a big splash as we try to provide pro bono services to individuals. I just wanted to take a few minutes and talk about the history of the Standing Committee and some kind of tips and pointers in trying to implement and prepare and be more resilient in your community. So the Standing Committee originated after, it was an outgrowth of Blue Ribbon Task Force that was created after Hurricane Katrina. And with the goal of looking at the association's intra-association initiatives within the ABA. So the task force evolved into the committee where it gained its permanence in 2014 when the ABA House of Delegates approved transition to the Standing Committee. So in the next slide, you'll see that our mission is to educate lawyers, bar associations, the justice system to help prepare for and respond to disasters, provide resources to assist lawyers and the public recover from disasters, and ensure the rule of law in times of disaster. So that's just kind of a broad swipe at what the committee does. We also work on putting out programs, publications, webinars, and lots of just resources for attorneys, for bar associations, for the courts, and really kind of wrap around all of the things that essentially fall outside of the Disaster Legal Services Program. So where that program is working on the direct services, we're kind of working on other areas of resiliency, planning, preparedness, and policy. So on the next slide, just kind of a broad stroke, if you go onto our website, there's no shortage of resources on there. There's some really great reference guides. I'd really recommend checking out the guide we have entitled Lawyer's Guide to Planning for a Disaster. For bar associations, we have a similar guide entitled Disaster Planning for Bar Associations. We've linked up other great resources such as the COLAP, the Commission on Lawyer Assistance Programs, to provide mental health resources. We've linked up the Pandemic Task Force website and other resources from the Law Practice Division. So on the next slide, you can really see there's no shortage of information or direction that one could take when trying to become more resilient. And at the end of the day, a resilient community has to start with resilient individuals. So it's really great that you've taken the time out of your day to learn more about this program, learn more about the committee's work. COVID-19 really threw a wrench in how we think about disaster response and recovery. Many of you probably have decent disaster plans either within your household, your bar association, or your law firm, or wherever it is that you're practicing. And it probably does account for the reasonable risk factors that you have in your area, such as a hurricane in the Gulf states or fires in California, although the Florida Panhandle is currently on fire as we speak. So most people don't think of wildfires in Florida. But so where COVID-19 kind of came in and gave us this 1-2 punch is that the legal needs have exponentially increased, but our ability to resolve them has been hindered because essentially the whole world shut down. We have lots of shelter in place through a patchwork of various orders from governors across the country, some of which exempted law practice as essential, some did not. Some people who have never teleworked now are doing so for the first time. Young attorneys who have young children are now part-time school teachers and daycare providers. So it's really, like I said, throwing a wrench into this whole process. So I want to kind of talk about some tips on what you can do to help better serve disaster survivors. And I'll start and end with the same word, which is communication. Preparedness is a shared responsibility and really requires everyone's involvement. You really have to start by talking to those who are similarly situated as you, whether it's a practice setting, firm size, geographic location, or risk factors. If you're an association, reach out to other associations to see what they're doing to become more resilient. Ask about lessons learned. I'm sure a lot of people have already learned a lot of lessons about how to as we start to ease into how we change our way of practice due to COVID-19. Just reach out to other people. You want to be talking, ideally you want to be having these conversations. We always use the term blue skies. I don't know if that's a good analogy for COVID-19, but we want to try to talk and get people to the table before a disaster, rather than trying to scurry around and see who's doing what in the midst of a disaster. And so again, that's a good plug for our website. Lots of good resources there that can get you that kind of first, some of those ideas for those first steps, but really you should be, talking to those in your community. Talk about who's, if we're going to do a hotline, if it's going to be done through a state bar association, or is it going to be done through a more, does it strategically make sense to do it through a regional kind of patchwork of hotlines? How do we get involved if there's a Stafford Act declaration versus non-Stafford Act? Again, those are things that you should be talking about. And if you're coordinating pro bono help, this is really critical to get the messaging right with your volunteer base, because we see an incredible amount of desire for people to help right after the incident, but that's generally not when the services are needed. And so those people rush to say, I'm here to help. And then when you reach out to them 6 months from now, they've kind of moved on to something else. So it's really critical that when you're engaging with your volunteers, that they know what's going to be expected and when it's going to be expected from them. Duplication is a huge issue. And I think this, again, everything really ties into communication. We see a lot of times in a disaster where people rush out to essentially do the same thing. So we kind of talked about the hotlines, whether you have a consolidated hotline or the patchwork. So does it really make sense to have, for example, in a large city, to have 4 or 5 different hotlines through a patchwork of all these organizations? Probably not, but we see that a lot. And that's where that's going to be a drain on time and money and just the human capital involved in that. And a lot of times when you're trying to respond to a disaster, you really don't have, those items are at a premium. So again, communication early on, very important. And it kind of gets us into the next point too, which is you really need to humble yourself. Humble yourself, play nice in the sandbox, figure out where you fall in the grand scheme of things when it comes to disaster response and recovery. Disasters often bring groups to the table that may not have worked together in the past. They may have similar or overlapping missions. It really, just for lack of better terms, results in these kind of turf wars, as some organizations may be competing for the same grant dollars, could just come down to personality differences. But again, by communicating early on, it's one great way to help mitigate that risk. Another critical item here is to give what is needed, not necessarily what you have. And what I mean by that, we see after a disaster, for whatever reason, people feel compelled, I think because they want to help, their head's in the right place, they go into their closet and they donate all of their old clothes that they're never going to wear again. Most of the time, this is the furthest thing that's actually needed. So the same goes for other areas of emergency management. We often rush to try to go, and we have the collective mindset, we have to do something. We push whatever we have out there. But again, you want to be thoughtful as, what are we putting out to try to help people? Are we just putting out whatever we have? Or are we taking a more strategic look to say, what is the actual need here? And to go from there. So those are just a couple of kind of tips and pointers. And again, just to end where I started, you have to really talk to people when you're, developing your plan, when you're executing it, when you're having, after the fact, roundtable discussions about lessons learned. It's a never-ending conversation. It's not a point in time where you say, we're going to get together, talk about it. Eisenhower is credited with saying, a plan is useless, but planning is essential. So part of the mechanics of just bringing people together, building those relationships with people is a big component to being more effective to helping disaster survivors. And so I'll close by saying that one of the components in the standing committee, we didn't really get into it, but it could be a much longer discussion, is advocating for policy, reviewing policy, or suggesting new policy relevant to disaster response and preparedness. And this is really where we need all of your help. Our committee is only 9 people. We only, we have limited bandwidth to just see what's going on out there. The reality is the people on this call, you're the ones on the front lines. You're the one that's seeing what's happening. And we need to hear those stories. We need to partner with you to either put forth resolutions that will become ABA policy through the ABA House of Delegates. Maybe it's something that's maybe more of an immediate, urgent, and critical need that could be something that perhaps the ABA president could write to a letter to the head of an agency. But there's no shortage of ways in which we as attorneys can try to advocate for the profession, try to advocate for rule of law, try to advocate for disaster survivors by putting forth that policy. So if you think of any of those, if you want to have more of an active role in helping write the resolution, or perhaps it's just passing along the message, whatever it may be, please feel free to reach out to myself, reach out to Linda, because that's something of great interest to the committee. So I think that's pretty much it for my portion. I think we got some time for some question and answer. I know you all had submitted, I think you were required to submit a question prior to joining the meeting. And so I'll switch it over to Tracy or Linda if we want to go through our Q&A session. Thank you.
Yeah, so thank you all for your wonderful contributions. Hopefully we answered most of the questions that you pre-submitted throughout our presentation, and we've also responded to your questions in the Q&A bubble, but does anyone have any other questions you would like us to address right now? Feel free to type, or I don't know, do they have the ability to speak, Tracy?
They're text-based questions.
Okay, text your questions, please, and then we can answer them live if there are any more. And of course, now you do have our contact information, and the presentation was recorded and will be shared, as well as our slides, I believe. So if you have any questions moving forward, you can always reach out to us. And if you are interested in getting your pro bono opportunities up and connected to the portal, you can reach out to Amanda, and please let us know about your COVID-19 statewide hotline so we can get those connected as well. Somebody else asked to hear the other questions posted, so I can just read those quickly. Can law students participate in the pro bono projects through the portal? Right now, we don't have a specific section for law student approved opportunities, but as programs start to come on board, likely there will be an opportunity for research and other support and opportunities for law students. And for those of you who are posting your opportunities, you can definitely include those as well, and we'll put those up there. Does DLS ever participate with its partners, such as the American Cross, in a boots on the ground capacity? The answer we gave was the DLS members do not typically do boots on the ground work. We do, however, coordinate with FEMA to allow attorneys and local volunteers access into the disaster recovery centers. And in some instances, we do send a team member in person to do trainings and things of that nature that are necessary. What is a Stafford Act declaration. The Stafford Act is the main legislation that authorizes funds to flow after a disaster. So meaning when the president makes a major disaster declaration, that's what I believe Andrew meant by a Stafford Act declaration. Is it better to use the portal than directly contact legal aid and other nonprofits in your state, or is this geared towards attorneys who are not aware of those nonprofits, who already recruit pro bono attorneys or don't know where to look? Definitely contact your local organizations. You're exactly right. This is for finding opportunities when you don't know where to start. The Stafford Act declaration did not include individual assistance or DLS. That is correct. For COVID-19, the only authorized program under the individual assistance program has been crisis counseling to date. So there is some mixed media and mixed signals out there, perhaps saying otherwise. It's not true. There is no DLS implemented anywhere as of yet. I think some other people posted in the comments some great resources, so definitely check those out. How do we connect to watch this presentation later? All of you who were registered for this program will receive a link to the registration, and the ABA will also post this information on social media and on their website, and anyone can view this later whether or not you are an ABA member. What about public assistance under the Stafford Act? Our program only operates under individual assistance. There is some public assistance available in different major disaster declarations for COVID-19, if that's what you are specifically asking about. But that's all state specific, so you can look up what your major disaster declaration is for. Judy Perry Martinez posted, all ABA member messages that go out today urge members to use the new ABA portal. All right. And we ask that everyone across the country to volunteer. Thank you, Judy. Am I missing any questions, guys? Do you see any?
That was it.
No. All right. Okay, well, we'll hang on for another minute or so if folks are still typing. But again, please feel free to contact us with others. And thank you all for joining. I hope it helps answer some questions and clear up any confusion about our new programs and what's going on in the face of COVID. All right, I don't see any more questions, so I think we will end now. Thanks, everyone. Have a great day and enjoy your weekend as much as you can.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.